Empire. It may not have been pretty, but I feel like the Pittsburgh Steelers made a big statement in their win over the Baltimore Ravens. What's up, everybody? It's Mike Jones. Thanks for coming back for another episode of the Football Jones podcast. You can read me at usatoday.com. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at @ByMikeJones. And yes, in my mind, the game of the week was the Steelers versus the Ravens. Both of those teams off to strong starts, battling for the lead spot in the AFC North. And it was on Baltimore's turf. And the Steelers, they trailed, they rallied down the stretch, overcame all kinds of, struggles, and won that game to remain undefeated. And so now I feel like they elevate themselves again above the Ravens, and I feel like they put themselves in an elite class. Because as I'm looking at the teams that are out there that I really think are elite, I'm looking at the Chiefs, I'm looking at the Seahawks, I'm looking at the Buccaneers, and I'm also now looking at the Pittsburgh Steelers. I know they had a perfect record coming into that game, but I just wasn't sold on them. And even in points late in the game and initially after it, I still was trying to figure out how I felt about them. But the more I listened to the coaches, players, the more I thought about that game, the better I feel about their chances of really making some noise this year, making a deep playoff run. And to dissect that team, I've got the help of Brooke Pryor, NFL Nation reporter from ESPN, and she and I are now going to dive into this Pittsburgh Steelers team, talking about how good they are, how much more work they have to do, and what their potential is for this season.
Support for this podcast comes from Drizzly. Hey, you. Yes, you with the empty drink in your hand. Have you ever heard of Drizzly, the #1 app for alcohol delivery? With Drizzly, you can compare prices from your local liquor stores to get the best deals on a huge selection of beer, wine, and spirits. Then have them delivered right to your door in under 60 minutes. And right now, Drizzly is giving all new customers $5 off their first order. Just enter promo code SAVE at checkout. Just download the Drizzly app or go to drizzly.com. That's DRIZLY.com and use promo code SAVE for $5 off your first order.
And here we are with Brooke Pryor, NFL Nation Steelers reporter for ESPN. Brooke, how you doing?
Not bad. I've got my coffee because daylight savings time is killing me, just like this team is killing me. I am just, everything is chaotic all the time in both football and the general world.
It is. I tell you, I wanted to have you on here because I look at the Steelers and I've only followed them from afar kind of. Yesterday was the first time seeing them. They've got this perfect record, but they're definitely not perfect. It's weird to see a team with that type of record not really put anybody away until the week before, is because the Titans missed yesterday. They did make a great play at the end, but they're just a kind of a funny, undefeated team. What do you make of them?
Yeah, they remind me a little bit of the Chicago Bears in the sense that the Bears had such a good record in the beginning, but you knew that they were fraudulent. At some point it was going to fall apart. The Steelers are much better than the Bears. I don't think that the Steelers are frauds by any means, but their record doesn't reflect the way that these games have gone. I mean, the last 2 weeks, I have been in the final seconds not knowing what my game story was going to be.
Right.
Because it comes down to the wire every single time. And there's good and there's bad in that. In the good, I mean, the Steelers are winning, and they're winning without playing their best football. So that you have to feel good about that if you're the Steelers, that they have not figured everything out, and yet they're still able to put away these teams like the Titans and the Ravens that are very, very good, but they have yet to play 4 quarters where I've felt like, yes, this is the football team that I thought I was going to see. It's either they have a great first half, they fall apart in the second. This one, they had nothing going in the first half, and came out in the second and looked like an entirely different team. It just feels like, I don't want to say that they don't have an identity, because you would think, 8 weeks into the season that they would have figured that out, but it's just, I don't know. It is a very weird team. And I mean, today we have to vote in ESPN's like our power rankings. And last week the Steelers were ranked number 1. I didn't have them number 1. I think I put them 2 or 3 behind the Chiefs and the Ravens. Even this week, I'm not putting them number 1. I still think that's the Chiefs. And I covered the 2018 Chiefs, so I know what dominance looks like and what it feels like in the press box and feels like watching it. I don't have that same feeling with this team, but you can't deny that, I mean, they're undefeated.
Right.
So by record, yeah, they're the best team, but watching them, they don't pass the eye test in the same way.
Exactly. And, I have to, for us at the Horn, we have to file a 3 things I learned from the game. And one, and I'm like trying to get ahead, and it's like early fourth quarter, and I'm writing the Steelers aren't as good as we thought they were. And I'm just like, okay, they've got a great record, they've got a good defense, but they hit these lulls, and their offense, the passing game is unimaginative. They just, and da-da-da. And all of a sudden, they just start coming back. And then I was just like scrambling to try to change, hey, they found a way, they know how to win ugly. There you go. And then in the press conference, when Ben is talking about like drawing up plays in the dirt, and basically they just went out there with a package they hadn't used, and he was saying like, Juju, run this way, Ray, run this way. And they really did. And then I was like, okay, so maybe the great thing about this team is that they have the leadership and the experience and the youth, and they know how to win ugly, and they don't really panic when things aren't working right, because they always find a way. And I'm like, but are they really that good? Or, I mean, I don't know. And I guess, hey, undefeated midway through the season, and I'm looking at everybody else, and if there is anybody who can hang with the Chiefs, maybe it is them. But something just still feels a little bit like you're holding your breath.
Yeah, I don't think so. I tweeted this out yesterday. When Lamar Jackson had, 52 seconds to go 64 yards, whatever it was, I could feel my heart rate. And so I checked my Apple Watch. I was like, what is my heart rate doing right now? It was 125, and I was sitting on my couch. And I am positive that that's what it's been in the final minutes of every single one of their games this year. Like, they just, you do feel like you're holding your breath. And to me, one of the most interesting quotes post-game was from Eric Ebron.
Yeah.
It was just a quote machine. I love when he has a good game, because I know we're going to get a great post-game from him. But he was like, man, I had friends before this week being like, well, if you beat Baltimore, then you'll really be legit. And he's like, we're 6-0. How are we not legit? But fine, we beat the Ravens. Now we're legit. And I was like, I understand that feeling from inside the locker room. However, I'm definitely one of those people that's been saying, are they really legit? They're 6-0. And I felt like I was going to be able to come out of this game and say one way or the other that they're legit, but I still don't know, because they keep winning in these ugly ways. But I do feel like when you look at the matchups, I thought the Ravens would be the most difficult team for the Steelers, just because of how strong that defense is. The offense has been okay. They're definitely much better with Ben Roethlisberger. And when they're clicking well, when James Conner is playing well, when you have so many receivers, they're good. But I did feel like what the Ravens were doing was really going to limit them. And then Lamar Jackson in that run game, even without Mark Ingram, was going to kind of be the worst nightmare for the Steelers defense. When I look at the matchup that they could have with the Chiefs, I felt all season that the Steelers match up really well with the Chiefs. A defense that strong, I think, is your best hope for slowing Patrick Mahomes and everything that they can do. So now that I've seen them play the Ravens, I kind of wish they were playing the Chiefs next, because then I could feel like, all right, now if they can beat the Chiefs, fine, they're legit. But this team just, it confuses me every week. It's fun, but it's confusing.
Well, I feel like as far as their division goes, this was the big statement that, hey, we didn't even play our best football. it took us a half to be able to figure stuff out, but we still beat the team that everybody, that we had the best regular season record last year. And they definitely have Lamar Jackson's number. For his career against the Steelers, 3 touchdown passes, 5 interceptions, 5 fumbles. And rushing wise, he had some plays, but I really felt like their defensive game plan was pretty genius. I mean, they were running a guy at him every time. As soon as he's had to get rid of the ball very quickly. He wasn't able to run. So that was like, man, they know what they're doing going at this guy. And I think that's part of the reason why also he was so sloppy throwing the ball, trying to get rid of the ball very quickly. And I'm like, okay, so if they can do that to them, even though, I mean, when they would do that, it did take a guy out of the equation as far as playing the run. But that's still really good. You can give up all those yards, but when it matters in the red zone, getting those takeaways, forcing the fumbles. And so I was like, man, okay, if they're going against the Chiefs, what helps them and what worries, you about them? And so what would you say? Like, and I know it's hard to really do matchups because they're not going to play each other, but if you would compare, because both these teams really well, what do you like about the Steelers if, say, they face the Chiefs in a playoff game, and what would you worry about against them?
To me, I think one of the most impressive things about what the Steelers did yesterday is that they stopped Lamar Jackson, and even though the ground game completely gashed them, the way that they were eventually able to win was with 3 guys who are very much under the radar players. Mm-hmm. They went into that game already missing Devin Bush, obviously out for the season. He's big in the run game, in stopping the run game. You're missing Mike Hilton, another person that he, as Mike Tomlin said yesterday, he plays like a little linebacker. Mm-hmm. He's the guy that you would see going at Jackson every play. And then in the first quarter, they go down Tyson Alualu, who doesn't play a ton of snaps, but he's been really crucial in the sub package in that nose tackle spot that Javon Hargrave played last year. So you have guys like, you have Rob Spillane, you have Isaiah Buggs who came in for Alualu, and then you have Alex Highsmith, outside linebacker, who primarily plays behind Bud Dupree and TJ Watt. But the interception that he had, he's on the field and there's 3 outside linebackers. I mean, you don't see that very often. I just think, to me, the most impressive thing about this defense is it was very much a patchwork effort. The guys who are making plays are not the superstars of this team. They're not the guys that you go in, you're like, man, I'm so excited to see Rob Spillane. That, to me, bodes well for if they end up playing the Chiefs, because if they're not at full strength, if they have more injuries, they have a sneaky amount of depth that going into this season, I didn't think that they had, particularly at inside linebacker, at nose tackle. Even at Mike Hilton's position, they have Cam Sutton, who's been really, really good. Beyond that, there's not much, though. And I just think that we were able to see them throw some defenses out there and some sub packages out there that we hadn't seen before, which tells me that defensive playbook is way deeper than we even know if they're able to do that on the fly. But the thing that would worry me, honestly, Tyreek Hill will be a big problem for them unless Minkah Fitzpatrick starts to play better. You had a guy like A.J. Brown go for 73, 74 yards because Fitzpatrick just hesitated. He thought that Vince Williams was going to tip that pass against the Titans. The Steelers have really struggled giving up big plays. It seems like, they'll limit guys on first and second down, and then third down they go for 20 yards or 24 yards. That is going to be a really big problem because this Chiefs offense makes a living out of these big plays. Tyreek Hill went off yesterday. If Minkah Fitzpatrick isn't playing better, if the secondary isn't playing better, that could be a really big problem. That would keep me up at night. You bring a guy in like Minkah last year because he has such a high ceiling. This season, he hasn't been able to replicate that. He did have a pick 6 against the Browns. And he was able to bat the ball away from Willie Snead. He made probably the biggest defensive play in the second half there. But You just need to have more consistency out of him. Otherwise, this game could get out of hand. This hypothetical game that we're all like, fingers crossed. We're doing the opposite of taking it game by game, week by week. Like, but January is going to be fun. Look, I mean, they have the Cowboys this week. We have to hold on to the possibility of Chiefs Steelers sometime in the future.
Exactly. Now, what about their offense though? Because look, they looked for like 3 quarters. It was like their best play was to just throw up that floater along the sideline and hope it draws pass interference, because their best play was a 18-yard run by James Conner and then 2 15-yard pass interference calls. Like, there were no other chunks. So if they're going up against the Chiefs, you got to be able to score quickly if, say, you're going back and forth. And say they need to play from behind. The Chiefs can score instantly in like 1 or 2 plays, boom, boom, boom. I guess a good thing is if they're doing the dink and dunk and work their way down the field, it keeps the Chiefs off the field. But if you're behind and you're working against the clock, how would they do? Because I seriously kept on grabbing my binoculars and looking to see if Juju Smith-Schuster was hurt, because he just had disappeared. And I just was like, oh, no, he's right there. Why are they not going to him? What's going on? And it wasn't until they went playground mode that they finally found him. So what's the deal with the offense here?
I think that playground mode is the key. Ebron, again, had something interesting to say afterward. He said, I think we anticipated this game too much. Like, we were too wound up in the first half. And it just felt like they were playing really stiff. I mean, Ben was throwing these deep balls down the sideline that just were nowhere near target. And he had his elbow massaged at one point. He told me afterward, like, oh, it was a funny bow. Like, okay, right, whatever. But I was sitting there like, oh no, is something wrong with his elbow? Like, why can't he make these passes?
The throws looked weak.
Right? They were just bad. And I do think that part of it was the Steelers got in their own head because this is such a defensive matchup. And they weren't playing free in the way that they were able to do in the second half. And I think that in that case, you have to trust your veteran quarterback. He threw 10 passes in the first half, 24 yards. It was so bad. I was sitting here like, oh my God, do I have to write like, well, the Ben bubbles burst. It's all over. This was fun for 6 games. Now it's done. And then he came out in the second half and looked like vintage Ben, in the sense that, yeah, he was telling guys, right, you go here, making these passes to Claypool. You saw Juju really muscling through guys. I think that this offense can be really good. The second half showed everything that they can be, in the sense that they have so many weapons on the receiving side. It's been kind of a running joke. I've had to answer our fantasy question almost every week. It has involved the Steelers, and it's almost always involved the receivers. And it's like, can I trust Chase Claypool this week? Can I trust Deontay Johnson this week? Every single week I'm wrong, because the real key is just that there is no rhyme or reason, it seems like, to who's going to have the hot hand. I mean, they know going into the game who's going to have it, but as a fantasy manager, I mean, this week I started Deontay Johnson, I sat Chase Claypool. The week before I did the opposite. So but that's what makes them so dangerous, is that they have all these weapons, and they're not necessarily like guys that you look at that are marquee guys. I mean, you're not thinking that a defense is going to have to scheme around James Washington. But they just have so many different options. And I think when they're able to spread the ball around, that's what makes this offense so dangerous. And it's because the passing game is so balanced and you have Ben back there, then that opens up the run game. That's not what they were able to do last year, because nobody was respecting Duck Hodges and Mason Rudolph for obvious reasons. You have Ben back there. You know that he can make the pass, except in the first half of yesterday. But I think everything can work in sync a lot better. And then you throw in what Matt Canada's doing with the jet sweeps and the short slants. It can be so good when they get out of their own way.
Having got that game that they were so highly anticipated out of the way, are you worried that there could be a letdown?
A little bit. I was just looking at the schedule yesterday. They play the Cowboys, the Bengals, and the Jags are their next 3 games.
Trap game.
Right. Like, is it possible to have 3 trap games in a row? Like, I looked at it, and then they play the Ravens again on Thanksgiving. Like, I know that this team is not going to look all the way ahead to the Ravens. And Mike Tomlin's not going to let their egos get so big. Like, that is the great thing about this team is that, I mean, talking to Mike Tomlin yesterday, you would have thought that they lost. He came right out and said, like, let's not let the emotions of the moment overshadow the fact that we played terribly. And he's right. That if you look at especially the first half stats, you'd be like, there's no way they're going to win this. Even through 3 quarters, like, okay, well, it's nice they made this a game, but they're definitely not going to come back. And I think that he's going to keep them grounded. It is going to be a challenge, though, because this is a younger locker room than the Steelers are used to, with guys like Juju and Claypool. I mean, and Ray McLeod. Like, all 3 of those guys were on, celebrating on TikTok yesterday. I know there are some fans of the Steelers that don't love that. I'm here for it, but you're going to have to rein that in a little bit. Yes, they're all tweeting 7-0, like losing, I don't know her. But you do have to be careful because I'm not going to go as far to say the Cowboys are a dangerous team, especially if Andy Dalton is the quarterback next week. The Steelers are very familiar with him. But you get a team like the Cowboys or the Jags, even the Bengals, they have nothing to lose at this point. So they're going to throw everything they have. And I don't think the Steelers are going to get too wound up the way they did against the Ravens, but they also have to make sure that they're, still staying in it mentally. Because it would be easy at this point looking, I think they have like a 70 to 80% chance of winning the AFC North, making it over 90% of making it to the playoffs for the first time since 2017, but there's still half a season to play. You can't just be content with the record right now. And I think that's also the good thing about them winning ugly is that they're not going out and dominating every team. So they do have things to work on every week and tangible goals and things that they need to do to get better. Because I mean, they could very easily play a close game against the Cowboys this week. And that would be, that would be about the way this season is gone. I'm not going to rule it out.
Yeah. Now, okay. So say they continue like this, Big Ben's got to be the comeback player of the year, right?
That's so tough because I want to say, well, it has to be Alex Smith. He at least got out there, and that's I know it warmed my heart. But if Ben continues, like, can there be 2 different categories? One for like comeback player of his lifetime because I didn't think he was actually going to get back out there, but actually had an impact on the season. Like the MVP of comeback players is Ben Roethlisberger if he continues at this clip. But I mean, I didn't think we were going to have a close race for comeback player of the year, but it's kind of, I don't know. I think, yes, it has to be Ben. I feel like I'm betraying Alex Smith, but yeah.
Yeah, I know both of these guys, like you're very familiar with both of them. So it's a tough call having covered the Chiefs and now there. Mike Tomlin, people were calling for his head. He's pretty much, kind of acquitted himself pretty nicely now that he's got his pieces back and he's got this young defense that he's really just developing and growing and then just like a mad scientist pulling stuff out and everything like that.
Yeah, it is looking at how, I'm guilty of it too. I started on the Steelers beat last year. My first day on the job was the Patriots Sunday night game. And they, lose that game. They have such a bad start to last season. We did a poll and it was, do you think your coach is on the hot seat and what temperature is it? And I think I put down that Mike Tomlin's seat was warm. And then midway through last season, like, wow, I was an idiot. Like it's not warm at all. Looking at not only what he was able to manage in that locker room for so long with Antonio Brown and the Le'Veon Bell situation and the way that he just kept that locker room together, the more things that come out about that, the more it's like, well, he retroactively should have won so many other Coach of the Year awards.
Right.
And then last year, he was able to keep the locker room together to the point that they almost made the playoffs without Ben Roethlisberger, even with Juju being hurt, with James Conner being hurt. He really kept that group together. And the thing that I really miss this season that we don't get to do going into the locker room is last year after practice, Tomlin would come in and the Steelers locker room's kind of in a big circle. he would come in and not stop by every single locker, but he'd stop by a good number of the lockers and just chat with guys. Like one time he was talking to Al Villanueva about like, oh yeah, we go to this ski mountain and I like this restaurant here. And just really being a coach that you want to play for, that you want in your locker room, that you enjoy talking football with and also life with. And these guys, they really respect him. They really buy in. I think that helped in the off season. Obviously I can't be in on the Zoom calls with the team, but talking with guys who were in some of those off season calls, they, even when things were crumbling and you have, George Floyd and the protests and all of that stuff, Tomlin's not making any public statements about it in the way that maybe some other coaches were, but internally they were talking about it. He was being a leader in just the way that only he can do. And again, a way that guys respect what he's doing. And now that's translating to this season where you've got COVID, things are chaotic, but he's still leading. And I think to me that's the most impressive thing about him, are all the intangibles that he brings to that position, aside from being a mad scientist on the football field and keeping this team competitive, even when it seems like they're trying their hardest to lose. I think it is kind of insane to me that he's just now starting to be mentioned more in the coach of the year, but I mean, he would be my favorite at this point, to a coach that is deserving of that award at this point.
Yeah, I mean, shoot, if I owned a team, that'd be the dude I'm calling to lead my men and get this thing going. And we'll see how it plays out. It'll be interesting the rest of the way. But anyway, Brooke, I really appreciate you coming on. This has been great. I feel like we could go on and on. So I'm definitely going to have you back later in the season, as maybe they're gearing up for a deep playoff run. Tell everybody where they can find you.
I am on Twitter at BE Pryor and on ESPN.com under the NFL tab.
All right, there you go. Everybody go check her out. You should be following her already, but if not, go check her out. So, Brooke, thanks for being on the Football Jones. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Mike.
Steelers are for real, I believe. Now they're going to make it interesting. Maybe they will have Steelers fans on the edge of their seats, but I do think that they have just that something special that'll enable them to overcome a lot, and that's what you need. I really wish that we could see them in the regular season against the Chiefs, just so we would have an idea of, a preview, but hopefully maybe in the playoffs we'll get to see them. All right, that's it for this episode. I hope you guys have a great day. Thanks again for listening. Again, you can read me at usatoday.com. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at @ByMikeJones. Do me a favor, share this podcast with a friend, and I will talk to you guys again next time.